The evening in the city was ordinary, autumnal, with fog rolling through the streets. Andrei, a taxi driver with many years of experience, was finishing his shift. His car, old and reliable, purred softly like a contented cat. But there was something strange in the air that night, as if time itself had slowed down. Around midnight, when Andrei was already about to go home, he received one last call. The order was from a remote area known for its old buildings and narrow, gloomy alleys. Andrei didn't like these places, but something made him accept the order. Arriving at the location, he saw a figure in a long coat with a hood that concealed the face. The figure stood still, looking directly at him, as if it had been waiting all its life. Andrei felt a chill down his spine but forced himself to smile and wave. The passenger got into the back seat and, without saying a word, handed him a piece of paper with an address. Andrei, not asking any questions, started the car and drove off. The city outside the windows began to seem strange, as if the streets and buildings were mixing and changing. "The fog is especially thick tonight," Andrei muttered, trying to start a conversation, but there was no response. In the rearview mirror. Suddenly he realized he was lost. The address on the paper was unfamiliar to him, and it seemed the longer he drove, the less familiar the streets became. At one traffic light, Andrei tried to ask the passenger about the route, but when he turned around, he saw that the back seat was empty. Panic gripped him. His heart beat faster. The feeling of being trapped became unbearable. He pulled over to check the address again, but instead of the usual handwriting, there were the words, "Your final stop." Andrei couldn't believe his eyes. He tried to look in the mirror again and suddenly felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned around and saw his passenger, who was back on the rear seat. "Who are you?" Andrei asked, trying to stay calm. The passenger finally spoke, and his voice was cold and hollow. "I am the one nobody wants to see. I am Death." Andrei didn't know what to say. His hands were shaking, and his breath was becoming erratic. "Why are you here?" he asked, trying to keep his composure. Death quietly chuckled. "Every taxi driver must take me at some point in their life," she said. "Tonight is your turn." Andrei felt the icy terror enveloping him. He was on the verge of panic but gathered all his will to keep driving. "Where should I take you?" he whispered. "Keep going," Death replied. "You will know when you arrive." Several minutes passed, which felt like an eternity. The car moved slowly through unfamiliar streets, and each turn seemed more sinister. Finally, they stopped at an old, abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Death got out of the car and gestured for Andrei to follow. Trembling with fear, Andrei followed Death through the cemetery gates. He couldn't believe this was happening in reality. Death stopped in front of one of the graves and pointed at it. "This place is meant for you," she said, and her words echoed through the empty cemetery. Suddenly, Andrei felt dizzy and lost consciousness. When he came to, he was still in his car, parked by the roadside. The fog had cleared, and the city looked normal again. But in his hands was the piece of paper with the address he had seen earlier. Trying to understand what had happened, he heard a knock on the car window. It was a regular passenger needing a taxi. Andrei quickly accepted the order and drove off, trying to forget the nightmarish experience. But every night, passing by that abandoned cemetery, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He knew he was lucky to avoid his final ride, but the question remained for how long.